stream in and get their lunch. And aren't we all enjoying the weather? Is everybody super happy to finally have summer? I know I am. Hey, Sharon, Oakville. I didn't know you guys were out in Oakville. How did I not know that? It's one of my favorite parts. Oh, Ottawa. I'm from Ottawa. Not originally, but my first job was actually at the Ottawa Citizen in the newspaper business, which has changed so much. It was that then owned by the Southam family. It was a long time ago. All right, gonna give it one more second here and then we'll get started. The exotic locale of Mississauga, love it. Port Severn, oh, I love it. We are really covering the bases of Ontario here. It's great. Well, welcome everybody, and we're going to get this show on the road because I'm so excited to talk to Jim. We were just talking beforehand. I'm like, Jim, I cannot believe we have not worked together, you know, in the past, because our philosophies on leadership and how we think about it are so aligned.
Very much so.
I feel like you're, what did they say, that expression? You're my brother from another mother or something, maybe in the relation of leadership. But Jim and I actually know each other through Patty, his wife, who many of you know probably from CTV, where I was very sad when she announced her departure, but I know she's on to new exciting things as well. But Patty and I have known each other for ages, and I didn't even know she was married to Jim. I sort of knew of Jim in one orbit, Patty in another, and then finally connected the dots. Oh, that's the Reid connection there. So it's great to have you here, Jim. Super
it's great
excited.
to be here too. Thank you for that. And lots of people don't know that Patty and I are married. They pick it up off of Instagram. They go, "What's Jim doing with Patty?"
Well, and I think you have a side career as Patty's personal photographer.
Yes, I am. I am definitely the Instagram husband. So, you know, I know how to get her in the best shots, the best lighting, all that.
Yes,
stuff,
you do very well. I think you need to talk to my husband about that. He always gets the most unflattering ones of me. Anyway, well, welcome everybody. So before we jump into the combo with Jim, I just wanted to kind of make sure, well, I've got this captive audience. We have been doing something pretty exciting at the Roundtable. So we have 4 values at the Roundtable that I know many of you that are alumni and grads know, which is dream big, make an impact, get shit done, and have fun. And if I were to rank them, I'd probably say get shit done is probably our #1 value, but it's all in the effort of making an impact. And so one of the things that we launched at the end of last year was a bursary program with Inspire. If you do not know about this charity, please go and look them up. But when we launched in December, I was excited to launch our bursary program. We're going to be funding a Indigenous youth, this is across Canada, through university, and we're going to do a bursary a year. But then we sort of issued a challenge to the community at the Roundtable to say, look, we have grown our business through word of mouth and referral business. And so for every referral that we get, we're going to take a percentage of those sales and we're going to try and fund more students. Well, I was away at a leadership conference for entrepreneurs, and one of the entrepreneurs challenged us to think really audaciously. What was a huge goal that you could come up with? And I immediately thought of Inspire, and I thought of the 215 bodies that were found in Kamloops of small children. And I thought, you know what? I'm not thinking big enough about this Inspire thing. I want us to fund 215 students, you know, and so many of you in the community have asked, how can we get involved? And you're going to be getting an email. Those of you that are in our alumni community, you're going to be getting an email from us kind of sharing exactly the 3 ways that you can get more involved. But very simply, if you know an organization that you think would benefit from the type of work that we do, please reach out. We are tracking all of it, and the more funds that we can put towards it, we're going to do that. We've also got a couple of other partnerships around this that are in the works that a little too soon to announce, but just wanted to put a plug for that. So it's our bursary program. Let's see if we can fund 215 people. I wanted to actually fund all the in recognition for all. And then, the folks at Inspire said, well, you know what, why don't you bring it down a little bit, Glain? So we're going to start with Impact 215. So I hope you'll be a part of it and help us really make a difference here. So thank you for being here with us today. And so just a quick reminder, we are going to have you all muted, but as with any roundtable program, the point of this is for you to be moving something off your desk. And, I want you to get the answers that you're seeking. What's going to make your life easier this afternoon after you get on this call? We can all jump on these things. They're all interesting, but really, what are you going to go into action after? So I have got some warm-up questions for Jim, as I always do, to set the stage, but I'll be monitoring the chat. Shelby's going to be keeping an eye on it too for me so that she can call it out if I miss any, but feel free to start popping some things in there, guys, so that we can make sure that you're getting what you need. All right, so Jim, I said a little bit about how I knew you, but I also want to tell a story about Jim because, I think we sometimes senior executives take on mythological proportions, right? And I work with a lot of them, and they're all really nice people, feet on the ground and down to earth. Anyway, I was down in Chicago with a client, and we were walking along the waterfront, and she was recounting this story to me because we were talking about authentic leaders and the number of authentic leaders we've known in our career. And she said, I remember once I interviewed at a place, and the vice president of HR was so wonderful. Like, he spent so much time with me, and even though it was an interview, he helped me really unpack what my purpose was and what I was there to do. And I realize now in hindsight, I probably wasn't qualified for the job, and he was probably being really nice to me, but I'll never forget that he made such an impression. I said, wow, this sounds like a fabulous leader. Who was it? Jim Reid at Rogers, when he was at Rogers. And I said, well, isn't that nice? Because I'm going to be talking to him next month. So great timing for this story. Thanks for sharing with me. But I thought, to me, I always love hearing stories like that, because I think as leaders, those are the ripple effects we create, right? These are even as somebody at a job interview that maybe you spent an hour with of your time, and yet, years and years later, it's still, making a ripple in her life. So it's so great to be able to talk to you about, your view of leadership. But I thought you might have a little laugh at that story, Jim.
That's great, Glain. Thanks for sharing that. And, and it's true though, as we have this responsibility, right, as leaders. Mm-hmm. And we touch people in so many different ways. And thank you for sharing that. That's a nice story. Now I'm trying to figure out who's in Chicago.
I know, now you're going to be spending the whole rest of this session on the side. But anyway, let's jump into it. I said to you at the start, I don't really like reading bios because I think we can all read your bio, but I thought, I'm always fascinated on how people wind up where they got to, because you were a military pilot, right, in the early stage of your career. And I'm going to go out on a limb and guess that being a CHRO at one of Canada's most respected organizations wasn't something that you wrote down as a career goal way back then. So give us a few highlights on what took you to this path.
Oh, it's so true. I mean, but the real truism in life is that we're the sum of our experiences. And, part of why I wrote the book that I wrote is to help people get clarity sooner in their career. So for me, it didn't come right away.
Yeah.
It took a few decisions that I made for me to get clarity. And then since then, I've tried to stay true to that. But yeah, I started as an officer and military pilot. I flew tactical helicopters in Germany for 5 years. And, don't question, the military service really made me a better person. I graduated from Royal Roads Military College, which is similar to what you see in the States with the United States Air Force Academy. But my military service, it taught me about service to others, to the country. It helped me clarify my values, and it made me a better person. There's no question about that. But after I finished, I moved into operations and I ran a business, and I started to learn more about teams and culture and its impact on performance, about how critical it is to hire right, in terms of the right people on the bus, which I'm sure we'll talk about later in this discussion. And then I came back from Harvard, the advanced management program, and the CEO of the company I was working in called me in, and I was lobbying to run a pharmaceutical contract research business. And he said, Jim, we've made a decision. We're gonna have you head up HR. And it was at a time when the business was going to take off from 500 million. We grew it to 2.5 billion. And I got that opportunity, and he saw something in me that I didn't see in myself.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'll be forever grateful to him. But yeah, I've had an amazing, amazing career, and it's still going. I don't feel like, even though I'm leaving Rogers at the end of June, and I've transitioned, I'm excited about the next chapter. I'm going to start a coaching business, and I'm on a couple boards. So life is good.
Well, and I think, I think it's amazing that, you had so many broad opportunities through your career. And I love what you said about it really is like the sum of all the parts, right? Like that's what we ultimately get to. And you've put this now into a book. You're adding author to your resume. I think when you Google leadership books, there's like, I can't remember how many billions of hits, but there is a ton. What were you hoping to contribute to the conversation around leadership? What's your goal with the book?
Well, I was so fortunate when I was at MDS and I moved into the CHRO role from running a business. Mm. But one of the things they did is they sent me down to Stanford to attend this program on organizational change, knowing that the organization was going to undergo a lot of change.
Right.
And it was there that I met Jim Collins. Mm-hmm. And he is a mentor of mine, and I still talk to him, not every month, but frequently. And I did 3 big projects with him. Good to Great was the first one I did with him. I learned so much about high performance, being a part of that extended research team. Then I did a smaller one, which was equally fascinating, called How the Mighty Fall. And
right.
That's a great story. It's a great book, great research. And then I did Great by Choice with him. So, he had always challenged me to write a book on leadership because we always had this debate. He felt that everything was explained by good leader, bad leader. He said, Jim, it's just not that simple. Mm. But, for those of us who've worked in organizations, who've worked for outstanding leaders and worked for poor leaders, we know the difference.
Yeah.
And so what I hope to deliver in the book is kind of anchored in the message that, high performance is really a personal choice in life. And many of the leaders that I was coaching were looking for something simpler, more actionable. And so what I try to present in the book is a leadership model. It's really about leadership in life. And it's a step-by-step guide to take your leadership to the next level. If that's what you want to do. Not everybody mm-hmm. does, Mm-hmm. But that's kind of why I did it. And so far, it's been received very well in Canada, and I'm just starting to promote it in the US.
Well, what I love about it is the way that you combine sort of that research, but that practical application, like it's grounded in, the data, and it's grounded in those sort of, proof points, but it's about, this sounds great in theory, but how do we actually integrate it as leaders who are overwhelmed and bombarded with, a million things that we're responsible for and doing every day. So I just love that you brought that created that bridge.
And it's never too late to learn. This is the thing that, one of the messages that I try to convey when I'm speaking to people is, we're here for a period of time, but you want to live your life with no regrets. Mm-hmm. And you have to go for it, right? You have to really go for it. And there's so much out there on leadership. Some of it's contradictory, some of it's too academic and hard to action. Mm-hmm. So part of what I was hoping to do was just simplify it, mm-hmm. make it way more simple so that you don't have to be a different person in your personal life than you are in your work life.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's it. The integration of the two, right? Often when I meet people who say, well, I'm one way at work, but I'm this way outside of work, I think, boy, that's got to be exhausting.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Like, how do you do that? I can barely manage being one person.
Yeah.
So let's talk, because the book is anchored around these 5 principles of high performance, right? And so you've got the first one, which, and some of our alumni, you're going to be like, wow, this is sounding familiar. And, this is really this might be my secret motivation for wanting to talk to Jim, is that it's validating you Roundtable alumni. This is why you need to come and keep coming back to these things. But clear understanding of values and purpose, core strengths that align to your passion, making the right people decisions, which I think is such a critical one and a tough one these days, given the market, managing energy, not time, and then consistent discipline to achieve results are your 5 kind of big pillar principles in the book. So let's talk about each one a little bit and unpack them a bit. I remember when I started the Roundtable and I had values as a core thing, people looked at me sideways. They were like, why are you talking about this fluffy value stuff? And yet my own experience is when people are unhappy at work, it's often because there's a values rub. And that there's a disconnect that's happening within that in the organization. I'm curious, in your own experience, maybe share with us, what is one of your core values and your own experience with, when were your values aligned? Have you ever had that experience where you were feeling a little bit disconnected or misaligned with the organization yourself?
I think we've all had that experience, when you're in a situation where your values are not aligned with either your manager or the organization, it's tough, right? It's some of the toughest issues that I've dealt with helping coaching other executives. And it's like, for me, values and purpose is the first principle that I talk about in terms of leadership, because it really is the foundation that you build your leadership on, right?
Yeah.
And this foundation, has to be strong enough to weather any storm that comes at you. Of course, when the sun is shining, it's easy, but values get tested, during the tough times, not the easy times. So there's, values are the what, of course, and the purpose is the why. And when I'm coaching executives, this is where I start, right? Because when they're struggling, I just kind of go through each of these principles one at a time in order to try to understand what the landscape is that the executive's facing. But when executives are experiencing a values misalignment, it's a very, very difficult situation, because your values and your decisions, your behaviors and your decisions, of course, flow from your values.
Yeah.
So it's tough to resolve. And because values are an inside out thing.
Yeah.
And when you're out of sync, especially with your manager's values, you know it. And it's not like your manager's going to change.
Yeah.
So often in these situations when you're coaching, I'm trying to present options to people, right? But most of the time, the executives choose to leave. What's the expression? Always change a losing game. And when you're dealing with values misalignment, it's a very, very difficult thing to work out. So, I can tell you that for myself, not at Rogers, but before Rogers, we all kind of bump into people that where they push your button sometime, and it's just, it really hits at the core. And I just, even though I love the company, I love the team, I love the organization, I've been there for quite a long time, I just couldn't reconcile when I got up in the morning. I dreaded, I dreaded going into the office. And so, I made a decision to leave and go into a different place where I could be more successful and be more myself and have more alignment. It's ironic that when your values are aligned, people say, well, you're going to think the same. That's not true. You actually, by having values alignment, it allows you to debate and disagree even more than when you're not aligned. You start with a handshake,
No, it's so true. And I mean, for you, like, because I find often when people land on their values, often they struggle with really crystallizing what their values were. Did you always sort of have a good sense of what your core values were from an early stage of your career life? Or is it something that really evolved for you and you got more defined and sharper as you went along?
I think I definitely got sharper through the military experience, because they kind of unpack you and put you back together, right?
Right. I can imagine.
And, through all the stories that you hear, the boot camp and all this kind of stuff, right? But what they're trying to do is to make you understand that we is more important than I.
Yeah.
Right? That the service to others is more important than service to yourself. But I would say for me, the defining moment was when I met Jim Collins at Stanford. I was there and he asked me, he said, why are you here? And this was after Built to Last, the research came out. And I said, well, I'm here, I'm running a business and I'm about to step into a new role, but you know, the business model, the business I was running was turned on its side, and I'm trying to figure out what to change to keep the business successful. And he stopped me and he said, Jim, that's the wrong question. And he went on to explain that in Built to Last, the Built to Last companies, they outperform their comparison companies by 7-1, not 2-1, or 1.5-1. This is total shareholder return we're talking, over decades. So it's not luck. He told me that in these companies, the first question they asked when faced with change was what not to change.
Right.
And what not to change is your values, your core values, and your purpose. And that's foundational, right, to success. And when everything else in the world is changing around us, it's your anchor point, your point of stability, right, that allows you to kind of weather the storm and come out the other side stronger. Yeah. So his view was there's an architecture for success. First, what not to change, values, purpose, then be open to change, strategy, you know, goals, priorities, because you have to adapt to a changing world. The world's going to be a different place in 5 years, and those who adapt the best are going to succeed longer term.
And I mean, I think that's where it gets so tricky, right? Because that's when a change in leadership comes in, where the values, because the thing I know about values is the way you and I could define a value is quite different. How we interpret that value is quite different. And so even when companies have strong organizational values embedded in their culture, when you see a new CEO come in, and we're going to get into, you know, sort of the talk about your experience with that, it's so interesting because I think of values like drawers, right? And the company decides we're going to open so many drawers, and some CEOs go like, you know what, I want to open this drawer more than that drawer. And that starts to, it's so interesting how that will start to shift a culture. And it's not that they don't share the values, but the emphasis they place on what's important, how they interpret that is what often can start to cause these rubs or shifts for people, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And we all do that with our teams. Those of us who have individual teams, like it's not just a CEO. We do that when we take over teams.
Totally right.
Right.
Yeah.
So we could spend probably a whole hour talking about values, but let's go into the next one, which was strengths. And I'm a huge, I heard Marcus Buckingham talk about, you know, their research and first break all the rules back in 1999. I'm like, I am on this strengths bandwagon. This makes so much sense to me. One of the things that you and I chatted about sort of in the pre-call was this real importance to know your strengths so that you can get really clear on what you want to take on and do and what you shouldn't. And what I noticed about some of the early stage career, you know, executives that we work with is that they're really hesitant to do that. They're really afraid to say no to opportunities because they're afraid that that might limit them in the future if it's not in their sweet spot zone. So what's your perspective on career risk about, you know, clearly defining, nope, that's not for me. Give us a bit of a flavor on that.
Yeah, so I'm very, like, you know this, Glain, from our interactions together. Like I'm sort of freedom within a framework, right? That's kind of how I think. And so the best coaching tool that I've ever seen or used as a coach myself when I'm coaching other executives is this very simple tool that comes from the Good to Great research called the 3 Circles framework. Collins calls it the personal hedgehog, right?
Yeah, the hedgehog model. Yeah.
But it's so powerful because it's about clarity, right? And focus. And when you there's 3 circles. Circle 1 is, what are your genetically encoded strengths? So I believe that on the assembly line of life, all of us, right? We're born with certain things we can excel at. We can't excel at everything. Right. So you have to discover through your experiences what you can be great at, right? What you can be the best at. Circle 2 is passion. When you get up in the morning, what's the work that you love to do? In addition, over and above your family and your friends and your hobbies, it's what kind of work do you love? Are you creative? Do you like to build teams? Do you like to build culture? Do you like to analyze things? So, and then the 3rd circle is make a living. So make a living is only really important when you're in transition. But what I say to people is, get clear early on in your career. Yes. And get to the intersection of because the intersection of these 3 circles is your best path for personal success. And the best executives that I coach, when I ask them, you know, tell me about your deep strengths, not what you're good at, what you're differentiated around, and what's your passion, like, they just give it back to me with such clarity. They don't say, hey, that was a good question, let me think about it. you know?
Right.
Well, they've got it. They've nailed it. You know,
Yeah.
for me, it became clear to me when I was a pilot and I was an instructor pilot. I came back from Germany and I was an instructor pilot in New Brunswick, teaching people how to fly helicopters tactically. And I got up in the morning and it was cloudy and I go, oh, great, it's cloudy. I don't have to fly today, or it's raining, you know, or something, you know, because you can't fly tactically like 5 feet above the ground when it's raining out, right? Because you can't see. But when I came into the flight room, most of my fellow pilots were disappointed. They were upset. And I realized that while I was trained to the same standard, I was a standards check pilot, I was an instructor pilot, you know, I was very proficient.
Yeah.
I didn't have the passion for flying. I was more interested in leadership.
Right.
And so the penny dropped for me at that moment in time that the key to success was you had to have both. You had to have clarity about your deep strengths and you had to have clarity about your passion.
Yeah.
You put them together, then, you know, and you do what you love to do, then work doesn't seem like work. So for me, I think most people say, you know, when you offer an opportunity to people early in their career, you know, I almost say, if you're not clear on your deep strengths and passions, take it, right?
Yeah.
But the message here is, if you want to be great, if you want to be good, take any opportunity. But if you want to distinguish yourself and excel, then most of the top executives that I know, when you go to them with an opportunity and say, hey, there's this great marketing job over here, we think you'd be fantastic at it. They generally say, hey, you know what? That's not me. Go talk to Glain. That's Glain. And she's got those strengths and she's got that passion, but my strengths and passion are different. And that's one of the reasons why, by the way, these top executives are always successful, because once they've figured it out, they don't start with it. Most of them don't. It's a discovery process.
Yeah.
But once they figure it out, they generally don't deviate.
Yeah. And I think what you're really making me think about is, I think sometimes early stage career, we're given a lot of messages, right? You know, around get a good job and, you know, join a company where you can progress and it's about the money, and we get fixated on those kinds of things. And I think, you know, if I think about formative experiences for myself, I remember reading a book when I was in my early 20s that was called Risk to Win, and it was written by some female entrepreneur. And one of the things, I took a lot from that book, but one of the messages was, your 20s is your time to take career risks. You know, try different things. And so I took pay cuts, I jumped around, I was that typical Gen Xer. And so, but what seemed risky to other people, like my mother, right? Oh, what do you mean you're quitting another job? Was actually less risky. I feel more worried for people who've had very safe careers these days than those that took some career risks. And that's what you're making me think of, is that, you know, stability and playing it safe is not necessarily what's going to pay off for you as you go forward in your career.
Yeah, I think that's true. And most people are winging it, right, when it comes to their career management side. Like you get your degree, you take a job. You know, you got to get a job, right? And so you take the first
you take the first thing. Yeah.
And when I always say to people, you know, early in your career, pick a company, you know, that aligns to your values, you're inspired by the purpose of what they're trying to do. And you know, and there's and a growth company, because in a growth company, there's opportunities for you, right? Longer term, build a career there. But later in your career, pick the manager. So early pick the company, later pick the manager, because it's when you work for an A-level talent, they're going to take more risks with you. They're going to stretch you. They're going to coach you. They're going to teach you. You're going to constantly learn and be challenged. You know, what's the expression? Steel gets hardened in a furnace. Yeah. And you're going to get stretched, and that's what's going to build capability and capacity for you. So you want to work for the best of the best when you get to your mid-career. And then, and in doing so, you also create sponsorship for yourself.
Yes.
So yeah, I'm a big believer in, look, it's a discovery process, but ultimately, you need to leave your 30s with clarity. So during your 20s, you know, discover, right? Figure out what makes you tick and what's your best path for success. But once you get clear, lock it down and go hard.
Yeah, I feel like that is it, right? It's like the 30s is about honing, right? So true.
Yeah.
So let's go on to the next principle. Again, I feel like I could spend an hour on every one of these with you, but let's go on to making the right people decisions.
Yeah.
And, in Jim's book, Good to Great, those of us who've read it, he famously talks about, getting the right people on the bus. You've got a little bit of a different slant on this people piece. So tell us about your take.
Well, I definitely think that, the Collins, a Good to Great Collins, he turned, his view was, and I agree with him, that for the Good to Great transition companies, this is not an opinion of his, right? This comes from the data,
the research, yeah,
and first results, then the data and the research. And every Good to Great transition company started with first who, then what. They started with building out a level 5 executive who built out a level 5 executive team. Yeah. So first who, then what, versus McKinsey, who starts with strategy. And then you look for people who fit the strategy in terms of skill sets and, technology, process, structure, all that other stuff, the 7S model that McKinsey had. So I believe that I really, in my life, that the most important choices we're going to make are about who we're going to spend our life with, our partners, our friends. From a leadership point of view, it's who you decide to bring on your team. And the right people for me is all about fit. It's alignment. It's you share the values. It's inspired by the purpose. They have the skill sets to be successful. They're team players. I'm just talking about myself now. They have a strong work ethic. They want to win, right?
Yeah.
A lot of drive. And the other side of the coin is just as important as a leader. Who are the wrong people on the bus, and you need to move them out, because they're the people who suck the energy from the room.
Oh yeah.
And they're team terrorists almost. They're not good for the team. They tend to be victims. They have bad attitudes, and they sabotage things. So, by making your signature quality one of your ability to make the right people decisions consistently, now you're set up, right? And that's why principle 1 is values. Principle 2 is strengths and passion. Principle 3 is right people decisions, because they build on one another.
Yes.
And getting clear on values and purpose and getting clear on your own strengths allows you to assemble, the ingredients for building a high performance team. So I think you have to be, most executives that I've worked with at some stage in their career, like I was just with, this is just in the last couple of years, coaching an executive, and he was getting pressure from the board around performance. And I said to him, you need to deal with person X. He's not performing. He's not the same person you worked with early in your career. And, at some stage in your career, your success is determined by yourself. But once you get to a certain level, your success is determined by the quality of your team. And so if he doesn't deal with it, then he's at risk.
Yeah.
And most executives I've coached or worked with, and there's been so many talented ones, have basically said to me that they waited too long to make a call.
Always.
It's never they move too fast. Almost.
No.
Always. It's usually waited too long, right? Yeah.
Always. And as soon as you let that person go, it's like all of a sudden, the clouds part and the sun shines, and you think, why didn't I do it earlier?
If I come at it from a bit more empathy, I would say that when people are not performing well, they know it.
They know it.
Right.
Yeah.
So have the conversation and just say, hey, listen, I think we need to go in a different direction. Like, here's what you bring. I want you to be successful. You're not going to be successful here. Let me help you get somewhere else where you can really shine and be happy, right? Because if they're not performing, they know it.
They know it. And I feel sometimes leaders go from this leadership abdication where they're being too nice. They confuse being kind and being nice, right? So it's not nice to not tell people how they're doing. It's kinder to have those conversations, but they sort of go from 0 to PIP, right? Performance improvement plan, and the person's blindsided, and that never ends well for anybody. Those sorts of, this like let's bring in the hammer conversation. So I think the more we can get over our own, and that really, all of this work is inner work, isn't it really, Jim? Like, how do you deal with conflict? How do you deal with those tough conversations, leader?
Yeah. And, the thing is, delaying these conversations doesn't help. Right?
Never helps.
And so you need to have, and one of the things that I recommend for people on the call that are listening is, if you're not, go get certified as a coach, right? It just gives you another tool in your toolbox to draw on, when you need to draw on.
Totally agree. I was told, and I don't know if you had the same experience before I did my coaching certification, I was always told that I was a great coach as a manager. That was one of my hallmarks. And then I did my coaching certification. I went, I know nothing about coaching.
Yeah.
What did I think that I knew about coaching?
Yeah, it's so true.
And it totally changed the conversations I would have with my team.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. So, okay, let's keep going here. So, and folks on the call, I know I'm loving all of things that are flowing into the chat here. I love that you guys are engaged in this, and feel free to start throwing in your questions too. Let's talk a little bit about energy, because this right now, we are in, the big quit, the great resignation. To me, it's a lot of people that are burnt out. Like, we are seeing people who are just, they have hit the wall, and are, frankly, I'm concerned, because this is not a good time to be making big life decisions when you're in that mode, right? And so part of, again, the next principle in the book is around not time management, which is such an 80s concept, really, but this idea of energy management. So talk to us about why leaders really need to pay attention to this.
I think in the chapter on engagement, I talk about, for leaders, there's kind of two dimensions to this. One is, you have to be fully engaged yourself, right? You have to be full on, right? You have to be full on as a leader. It's such a responsibility to lead. And you can't expect your team to be engaged if you're not engaged. So that's sort of the first thing I'll say about that. I attended this workshop in Florida by Dr. Jim Reid, who co-authored a book called The Power of Full Engagement. And at the time, he was a sports psychologist. Well, at the time he started his career as a sports psychologist. He helped athletes like Gabriella Sabatini, Mark O'Meara, people who are great athletes, number 40 or 50 in the world. That's pretty good, if you look globally, you're 50. And he helped them get to number one, not by knowing anything about the sport, but all about mindset and how to think about being at your peak performance when you need to be. And when I was on the program, he broke down some myths for me around engagement and energy. The first was, like, the old paradigm was, as you said, manage time, right? If you could get yourself organized, you can have fun, type of thing. And he talked about it's not about time, it's about energy, right? And I'll come back to that in a minute. The old paradigm, my mother always said this: you had too much stress in your life, you need to avoid stress, right? Well, Dr. Jim Reid's view was, no, stress is good. It builds capacity. Stress. This expression, life is a marathon, you have to pace yourself. And his view was more, life is a series, for high performers, life is a series of sprints followed by recovery. Downtime is wasted time. No, the new way to think about downtime is productive time. So, there's a relationship on energy between stress and recovery. And I think what's happened during the pandemic is that the blurring between work and life, the demands on people, the fear that people had about their health of their families, themselves, their parents, it took a lot out of people. Yeah. And what people weren't able to do is they didn't know how to recover from it. Yeah. Yeah. And so I think what I've learned about the top executives is that they're very good at, they go from sprint to sprint. They sprint and they perform, then they recover. They sprint, they perform, and then they recover. And they've built rituals around energy management and keeping their energy at high levels so that when they need to draw on it, they're ready. So there's a whole kind of, I won't get into any more on this. It's all in the book and stuff like that. And there's all kinds of stuff you can read on it, but it's very powerful stuff in order to get yourself to engagement. And then I think there's a whole methodology around how to build a team, how to build a high performance team. And most leaders are not skilled properly to be able to, even understand what the elements of high performance team are, never mind how to build it. And you need to be able to do both.
Yeah, it's not, I think I was thinking about, how did I learn how to build a high performance team? Well, I happen to have a manager who's really good at it.
Yeah.
You know, and so I learned from him. And so it is one of those areas. But I just want to ask you just real quick before we go to the last pillar, and then I got some questions coming in here. How do you recover? What's your go-to strategy for recovery? I mean, you've had, and you know, like, let's not sugarcoat it. I mean, Rogers has been through the ringer in the last little bit, right? So how did you do that for yourself? Give us a couple of techniques that would have worked really well for you.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the biggest thing for me, right, Rogers, I had 11 years at Rogers, right? So the first 10 and a half were amazing. And the last 6 months was very challenging, right? So for all kinds of different reasons. It's a great company. It's got fantastic people. It's going to be around for a long time. It's got a very bright future. But you know, when all the stuff was happening with the family and the board, it was tough.
Yeah.
And I think I've always, someone told me when I was in the military, I had a instructor pilot who told me one of the aircraft crashed, and both and the student pilot was killed.
Wow.
And he told me, he said, he gave me some great advice in life. He said, listen, all the big decisions you're going to face, you have to make these decisions before you get in the moment. And he was talking about when to eject from an aircraft. And he said to me, we're sitting in the aircraft. He said, Jim, when the AGT, exhaust gas temperature, hits 800, you eject.
Right.
That's how you do eject, you eject, right? You make that decision today, right? Because you won't have the time if you wait.
Right.
So what I would say is, not as dramatic a situation, is you have to know, like, how am I going to face stress when the demands on me get high? You have to be physically fit, and you have to be able. You have to learn how to sleep.
Yeah.
You need to, and I'm a terrible sleeper. Yeah. And so there's been a couple of times in my career where I've really backed myself into a corner, right? Where I wasn't as fit as I needed to be. I was just a mess, you know, like I'm sort of heading to the cliff at, 60, 70, 80, 90 miles an hour. And so I think you have to decide now that you're going to take care of yourself. You're going to get proper sleep. You're going to exercise. You're going to, I've got Patty. Like, Patty is the best secret weapon. And she just looks at me and says, Jim, we need to shut it down now,
Yeah.
And so she's been a great support to me. But you need people like that in your life, right? Because
you need those red flag mechanisms, to coin another Collins phrase, right? We need those red flag mechanisms.
I used to think meditation was sort of, it's not for me.
Yeah.
But if you learn how to meditate properly, you can recharge yourself in a very short period of time. So ritual, it's all about rituals, right? How do you turn things off? How do you recharge? What's important to you? How do you replenish?
Yes. Yeah. How so important. And, and all the things you're saying, I know people on the call are going, oh, what, isn't there some other silver bullet? Tell me something easy, but it does come down to these things. And like you, I always say to people, like, I started meditating probably about 8 or 10 years ago now. It was a game changer for me. Yeah. It was a total game changer. So totally with you on that.
Yeah. And you have, like, I think that when you get to the top of the house, like into like a big executive job, president of a business unit, a C-suite executive, a CEO, you're playing in the big leagues, right? So energy management becomes essential.
It's your responsibility. Yeah. No question. Because I always say, I don't like there. We all have the dark side of our personality. And when do they come out? They come out when we're overextended and under stress. Yeah. I always say that's the person I like the least. I'm not at my best when I'm in those moments. And so if I'm responsible for people on my team, I got to be responsible around how I'm also, because your energy cascades, 100%. Right, as a leader. Right. Yeah. All right, let's talk about the last pillar, and then I'm going to get over to the question that came in because it's a juicy one. So the last one is about this consistent discipline to get results. And I find this one fascinating because we have a research partner that we work with, and they were actually commissioned to do a big research project to see, like, how many leaders can balance both. And does it matter? Like, they actually wanted to ask the question, does it matter if you can balance results and people, and do people who bring those two pieces into perspective get better overall results? And the answer was yes. And then the depressing thing was, when they first ran the research, less than 1% of leaders effectively managed both. And now I think they were second, they did it again, they repeated, and it's just under 5% of leaders. tend to manage both well. So I'm curious with the, your experience and the leaders that you've worked with, and yourself personally, how do we manage this drive for results in organizations that can't seem to get enough? Productivity targets. Like, I've never had a company that I've worked with that have said, oh yeah, we've kept our targets flat from last year because we grew so much last year. We're just going to keep it flat this year. Never happens. So how do we do that? What's some of your practical advice and perspectives? Because I know this is a tough one.
I mean, it's a tough one, right? But I would say that what I would say is that I think about it this way, but I've learned to think about it this way. And I would say that top performing executives think about it this way: is they don't think of it as an either or, right? As a trade-off. Like, okay, yes, I gotta go for results. We're having a tough quarter. So, let's put all the good people practices aside for a minute and just like drive hard for the finish line. I think they think of it as an and. You have to do both. And organizations, they want people in the organization to care about the company and to feel a sense of pride, etc. Well, they're only going to do that if their leaders care about them.
Yeah.
And I think I'm heavy on the other side. I think the more progressive we are as leaders about caring for our teams, and I saw this in the military, I was shocked at how two officers in the same rank, say a full colonel, how they built followership very differently. So one had incredible followership. The other had very little. But they're the same rank. They have the same. Why? It's because of how they approached and led their teams.
Yeah.
This notion that leaders eat last. They care. You have to care for the people you lead, and when you do, they'll pay it back 10 times over. And so I think the more that leaders care about their people, the stronger the results their team will deliver. Assuming that the fundamentals are in place of a high-performing team, like the right people are on the bus and in the right seats. It's good communication. There's high levels of trust. The priorities are clear and they're aligned, right? All that stuff has to be there too. But if you're a hard-nosed leader pushing people, you're not going to sustain high levels of performance for very long. Not in 2022.
And I think for leaders who lean more on the results side, this is what you're making me think of. I think if you're a leader that leans more heavily towards a results orientation, you got a lot of that, if I were to use colors, red energy or a driver, I think it almost feels risky to love your people and to believe that, okay, this water tide is going to rise if I put this energy into my people, right? And I think that's often what we see, this disproportionate emphasis in some organizations around the results drive. I'm going to tolerate the high performing salesperson who's a total jerk, totally toxic, but they're delivering, $5 million a year. I'm not going to pull the plug on them because that feels too risky when I'm leaning that way. And that goes back to what you said at the start with your values, and it goes from there. But that's where it starts to fall apart for organizations, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And I took this lesson to heart in the military because they're training to you're basically going to go fight for your country, right? Putting your life on the line.
Yeah.
So why would that one officer who cares about his team and reflects that in all the interactions why are they always more successful? Because they get it back 10 times over. They get the commitment back.
Yeah.
They get it back. Right? People get tested when the times are tough and results are poor, and you got to step it up. You got to count on people to come together and deliver.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think it's an and, right? It's not. People get caught in the classic trade-off. Do I take care of my people or do I deliver? Well,
right.
Best leaders do both.
Yeah, genius of the end. How do you do both? All right, I want to get to this juicy question from Shami. I hope Shami, I said your name right. What do you do if you have a toxic manager? How do you speak up so that you don't harm your job? What's the best way to manage that, Jim?
Well, look, I think when you're working for a bully or someone who's disrespectful or who blames people, you're in a difficult, you're back to this values issue, right?
Yeah.
And this values misalignment. And there isn't nothing that you say to that person is likely going to change them.
That's right.
And so it's okay to say, look, to stand up for yourself and take a moment and say to them, listen, in that situation, I just didn't feel that, what you said to me in front of the team was respectful or was fair. And I'd like to have an opportunity to talk that out with you so that at least you feel good about yourself, that you stood up for yourself. I think that's okay. Pick the right moment to do it and do it as soon as after the moment happens. But, my general advice to people who are, well, as a coach, you don't give advice, but when you're coaching them and you try to lead them to an outcome that they are committed to, it's almost always going to be, you need to move on. Because your manager who's the bully or the toxic manager isn't going to change.
How do you feel, where does the responsibility for that lie in organizations to deal with that kind of behavior?
Well, I think ultimately, the CEO of the company is the chief talent officer, right? And has to drive the talent agenda and has to lay out for all of the leaders, what's expected. And they say that your culture will be defined as a CEO, your culture gets defined by the worst behavior you're willing to tolerate.
Yes.
So you just have to go after hard the behaviors that are getting in the way of, building the kind of company that you believe in. And but I think it's, so it's very much at the team level, a leadership accountability. Like, leaders, Dave Ulrich taught me that, and I like this because it's simple. He said, leader has two roles. One is to drive value to the customer.
Yeah.
And the other is to shape a high performance culture.
Yeah.
And, and he's right. What did Drucker say? Culture eats strategy for breakfast. Culture is the execution engine of the company, and you change culture one team at a time. So leaders have to be very skilled at not just developing individuals, but developing and building teams.
Yeah, so true. And this is a good segue to Gabby's question, I think. She's asking, where do you start in helping an organization to develop their leadership skills and capabilities, especially in an organization that hasn't previously valued or invested in these quote unquote softer skills? I love this soft skills thing, right? Because I always think those are the harder skills, the what we call soft skills. But where would you start?
Yeah. Well, I think the it goes back to guys like Stephen Covey, and he talks about your circle of influence, right? Well, where you can start is with the team that you lead and manage. Yeah. And what I always say to leaders is like, because it's often what happens is it's kind of like, well, I'll start when they get their act together, right?
Yeah.
But I think people should always, if it's important to you, you should start with your own team and how you're going to lead. And if the people who report to you lead teams, hold them to account too. But you can build excellence on your, to quote Jim Collins, minibus.
Yeah.
Right. And nobody else can stop you from doing that. And so to me, that's where you start, right? You start by living it yourself and show people that by doing that, and building a team that's the best high performance team in the company. Like, that's your goal. I want my team to be seen as the highest performing team around. So that's, I don't know if that's, but anybody here can reach out to me on LinkedIn if you have specific issues or problems or whatever. I'm happy to. I love solving problems with people. So, Gabby, if you don't like that answer, you know where to find me. Okay.
Yeah, no, but I think the thing, and the title of my book was called the Grassroots Leadership Revolution, because I sort of feel like too often people give all their power away, right? As leaders, and they're like, oh, I don't like how the executive team is, and I don't like this and this and that. And it's like, I love that. I hadn't heard the Jim Collins minibus. You can do this within your own bus. So, you've got buy Jim's book, buy my book, buy mine and Jim's book, and you'll get to kind of go like, why do you like, and have a conversation with your team about core values, and then have a conversation with your team about strengths, and then have a conversation with your team about, you know, all the guiding principles, right? So that you start to create ripple effects in your organization. I think sometimes if you come from a big company like Rogers, where there's good structure around learning and development and leadership development, but I think as, you know, as team leaders, we can role model. And I actually, you know, think that there's a great opportunity for us to have people go, hey, what are you doing over there with your team? I want to have what you're having, right? And create that grassroots upsurge, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That's another way to do it. All right, so we've got we're down to the last 5 minutes, so we've probably got 3 minutes. If you've got a question, jam it in there now, or else I'm going to go ahead with mine. Let's see. Okay, I'm gonna go with my question, and we'll see if we have time to get another one. But I always like hearing, okay, so when you look back at your first leadership role and the leader that you were at that time, what would be the advice that you would give that young man that, you know, with the benefit of where you are now? And then, you know, we have a lot of people on this call that aspire to C-suite roles and, you know, aspire to kind of move up in their head. You know, what advice would you give folks like that with that type of ambition? Is it the same? I'm curious.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about some of this, you know, through the call today, but I think I think first of all, you have to have clarity, right? And the sooner you get clarity, the better. Get clear on your values and your purpose in life. Get clear on your strengths, your passion, and that will help you, you know, build a great team, you know, and then, you know, get yourself in all the things that we talked about, right? So I think clarity is the first one. I think the second one for me is, you know, goes back to what I mentioned before, like steel gets hardened in the furnace, right? Like you've got to go for it, right? When the opportunity presents itself, I see a lot of people holding back.
Yeah.
And you got to just hit the gas pedal and go for it. And the risks are not high.
Yeah.
Almost always you'll be seen as somebody with drive and who tried to make a difference. And, you know, maybe it worked, maybe it didn't. But you don't want to get 20 years down the road and say, I wish I would have gone for it.
Yeah.
So I think you just have to go for it, you know, and also remember, you know, there's a transition in your career, right? At one stage, your success is no longer just dependent on you. It's you need to get great at building high performance teams.
Yes.
And I would say for me, those are the, you know, get clarity early. The earlier the better. Go for it and be known as somebody who develops people and teams. And the world will open up to you.
Yeah.
You know.
2000%. Well, Jim, I feel like we could have talked all day. You are definitely one of the Roundtable family for sure. So I know folks will be reaching out to you, I'm sure. And everybody, this is what Jim's book looks like. So go ahead, order it online. It's available. Excellent read, super practical, which you know we're all about here. And in terms of where we're at these days, those of you alumni on the call, I just wanted to flag for you, we did relaunch the Roundtable Academy site. This is a place you'll find this recording if you want to be able to share it with your teams after. It's going to be up on the alumni site. If you want to know how to become an alumni, well, stay tuned. I'll tell you more about that in a second. But if you need help navigating that site, reach out to Shelby. And for us, those of you who, I know we've got some new folks, we're all about group coaching, group mentoring, and team coaching. So give us a call if we can support you in any of those things. And if you want to dip your toe in the water, our signature program, which is called the Roundtable for Leaders, which covers all of the things that Jim's talked about in terms of those core principles of values and strengths and brand in particular. We have an open enrollment that we only offer twice a year. It is enrolling right now for senior manager and directors in the fall, so you can follow up with Shelby if you'd like more info on that. And if you want to do it yourself, pick up my book. It tells you how to do it on your own. You don't have to come to us. You have a whole roadmap through my book, The Grassroots Leadership Revolution. So give that a go. But stay in touch with us. Thank you again, Jim, for being with us and being so candid and sharing all of your great wisdom today. It was an absolute delight.
Thank you so much, Glain. Thanks to everyone who tuned in today, too. All the best.
Yeah. Bye, everybody. Thank you. Oh, and I'm glad you enjoyed the discussion. That makes us feel good.